Awesome. Thank you all so much for being here with me. This talk has been kind of a very long time in the making. So to actually be here and sharing it with you I'm just so grateful. Um, so yeah, let's dive in. I'm going to be speaking about untangling DevRel using network graphs to tell a story. And please do not worry if you're like, I do not know what a network graph is. That's really scary. You actually probably do, but I'm going to explain the basics. So no need to fear. For those of you that I don't know yet, I'm Kourtney Meiss. I grew up here in the Northeast over in Massachusetts, but I've spent the last 8 years in Austin, Texas. I have been a developer advocate at Box, TraceLink, and as was just mentioned, I'm actually starting at Amazon on Monday. So really excited about that new journey. And then this is my second year at DevRelCon, but my first year speaking. And outside of work, I am a really avid reader and I have a million houseplants. So if either of those of you are your thing or you just want to chat about the cool stuff you're doing, let's nerd out together after this. Come find me later today. Okay, so let me give you a quick summary of what we're going to cover. So first, I'm going to give you a background of how I got started on this idea and some existing models that I explored as a foundation. I'll talk about the gap I saw with those models that led me to develop my own, and then give you that quick overview of network graphs, the basics you need to know, and the uses I see for implementing the model and some next steps I'm going to be working on in the future. Okay, so when I started at TraceLink, their platform just launched, and the DevRel function we were starting to build from the ground up. And in those early days, we were really uncovering a lot of things that needed to change. And those ranged from like back-end pieces of the architecture to product features like tokens that needed to exist before we could even like think about putting something in front of a developer. And so I started asking this bigger question, which is what would a company need to think about as early on as possible to set DevRel up for success later on so that we wouldn't have to go back and spend time making all these changes and we could get to work. So I wish that I had had a model to answer this question. But instead, I thought about something my dad used to say about problem solving when I was growing up. And that's a quote by Stephen Covey, begin with the end in mind. And yeah, that seems so simple, but we often forget to do it. So I started mapping out everything I could think of. What would the most mature program look like? And what are all the behind the scenes activities that would have to happen to build that mature model? So then the State of DevRel 2024 report came out and it validated what I had been thinking. So as I began to map all this out, I was realizing, wow, like this isn't just a tool for planning, it's actually a way to visualize the impact of DevRel. Like especially when we were working with leadership and stakeholders who don't work in the day-to-day. They maybe never even worked with a DevRel team before, and they just like really don't know what they don't know. So if you're not familiar with this State of DevRel report, it's by DevRel Agency. It's probably one of the most widely referenced surveys in the field. And it reports on things like how are teams structured? What are they focused on? What challenges are they facing? And it found that 61% of DevRel professionals were saying that they were finding it difficult to prove their influence. Half were struggling to raise awareness about their contributions. And then for the first time, proving business impact jumped to the second largest challenge. So if I built a model, maybe it wouldn't just be useful to me. Like maybe there were people out there that wanted to prove their impact and ultimately make their work more visible and more valued. All right, so I didn't want to pour any more time into this if it had already been done. And there was a piece of me like kind of hoping I was going to find it. Unfortunately, that was not the case. I had asked, is there a model out there that visualizes the internal structure and impact of DevRel programs, especially as they mature and grow over time? And again, what I found was no. No one that I could find had done exactly that before. But what I did find were a couple existing models that had pieces of what I had been thinking. And they didn't tell the whole story, but I could take the pieces that I liked and make something else. So the first one I'm going to show you, you're probably familiar with. This is by DevRel Agency. It is the developer journey map, and it takes stages of the developer journey and maps them to touch points. So if your program is just getting started, like ours was at TraceLink, this was a really helpful tool because it made sure that we were prioritizing the right touch points early on, and then as the program matured, we shifted to other touch points. And then here is also by DevRel Agency, the Mind the Gap Developer Journey Tube Map. It builds on the last framework or model I just showed. Oh no. Okay. But love that. Okay, so this one's the same, has the same touch points, but it adds a layer of complexity on top of it that shows that the developer journey isn't actually linear like the last one. So developers can enter at any point that you see. They can take different paths. They can jump between the tracks as their needs and the journey progresses. So this was honestly a really valuable model that highlighted that nonlinear journey. And then the last one I'm going to show you is by Sean Wang, and it talks about monthly active developer metric. And this argues that your North Star metric should not actually be monthly active developers. Why? Well, that's a lagging indicator. It's multi-causal. And instead, you should really be focusing on what you see on the left-hand side of your screen, which are leading indicators. And those are things that you can have more direct impact on. Okay, so all of these models I just showed, they're really great. They have a time and a place, and I've referenced them very often. But the problem is that I felt like all the internal functions were missing from those models. I mean, there's cross-functional collaboration that has to happen. There are dependencies, there's foundational choices that have to be made, there's maturity over time, and the team ownership of all those things that have to happen. So again, I did want to highlight that the path is nonlinear, but it is interconnected. So I made my own model. And the goal is to visualize that internal structure of DevRel and impact as the program matures and grows over time. I'm calling this the worm model because it visualizes work streams, ownership, relationships, and maturity. And as cute as this little guy is, this little text is worm, I had to decide, like, okay, what's the model actually going to look like? So I was brought back to my middle school days. Our teachers would have us make mind maps, which you'll see on the left-hand side of your screen. And what you'd have was your central topic in the middle. Then you would branch out with your related ideas. And we did things for essays when we had to break them down. But I knew that wasn't really going to cut it. This is what DevRel looked like in my head. You had your central function, and then you branched out with all the teams and things that you were working on. But DevRel doesn't just branch out. It's actually more like a web. It has to go in all directions. And so that brought me to network graphs. This is a network graph. You might not have known it was called that, but you've probably seen something like this before. And these are structures made to show exactly that kind of complexity. So 3 main things you need to know about network graphs that are important. The first, we have circles that are nodes. These represent individual entities. We have edges. Those are lines that connect nodes to each other and show interaction or relationships between two nodes. And finally, we have direction. Those are the arrows on the edges. They can be bidirectional, and they show the direction of the relationship or the interaction. Okay, so I'm going to reveal my model now, but I do want to give a disclaimer. So this is going to be the worm model I built at TraceLink. This is not a one-size-fits-all model because we all know that DevRel one-size-fits-all is actually impossible. So the goal here would be to take what I show you, use it as a template, and then adapt and remix it for your enterprise, your needs, your goals, your challenges. I will give you details at the very end of how to access this presentation, images from it, the templates at the very end. So the goal, because things are small, to get it all on the screen. Don't worry about all the details. I'll point out exactly the high-level things I want you to look at. But I want you to get a really good look at the general overview and structure. Okay, here it is. This is what you've all been waiting for. Okay, so this is the first variation that I built while I was at TraceLink. You'll see it is color-coded into the high-level categories, which are listed on the right-hand side of your screen. And this represents not just activities that we were doing, but this was me mapping like the most mature version of our program that I could think of. So we were involved in conversations about the business. So like, what target personas do we have? What's our strategy for the platform? What's our partner program going to look like? But we also needed to be involved in really technical conversations, like what authentication methods do we want to support? And like, how are we going to handle our API versioning? So in the early days, we didn't have metrics. Like, there was nothing that we could meaningfully really report back on. It felt like we weren't moving the needle at all, but we were. Like, it was just invisible, all these really important conversations that we were having. And that's where this model came into play, because we started to be able to visualize it to people that we were making progress. Okay, so this is the next variation of the model. So we took the base model, and then we added another layer of health and status to it using color coding. So you'll see I used a tool to create this called draw.io. Super easy, intuitive, and free. But there's a lot of software out there you could use to recreate this. But what I love about that tool is like it's super easy to go in and really just edit like the colors of each individual node quickly. But for example, anything that we had released, it was in a stable place and was just like entering a maintenance mode, we put in green. Yellow was for things that were in progress. And then anything in red, blocked, needed attention. And white was just like, we haven't even touched or started it yet. And one important conversation that you have to have if you're using this version of the model internally is like, okay, well, what are the criteria that nodes need to hit in order to move from one color to the other? But this became a really great visualization for leaders and any internal stakeholders, so that we could put this on a slide, and one glance gave them a really high overview and insight as to how things were going. And then here's the last one I'm going to show you. The color coding shifts again, but this time in navy blue, we put things that we were targeting for that quarter. Green represented anything that was already done. We had our yearly targets moving forward in yellow. And then I do want to call out anything in gray was things we weren't targeting. And this is arguably really important because it helped us, it was a forcing function. It helped us have really difficult and often like challenging, awkward conversations about like, okay, well, in other mature programs, they have this, but does it really make sense for our program to have that? And we could revisit it at any time. I mean, we just had to go in and change the node's color if our program got more mature and it started to make sense. But we did want to document that a conversation had been had and we made a decision on it. Um, so this version really became our North Star as we were planning. Okay, so if any of this like resonated with you, you want to spend more time digging into the specifics, I've made the full presentation, all of the images and downloadable templates available on my GitHub. Just scan the QR code. If you do use this model, or you even just like sit with it for a bit and have some thoughts, I would really love to hear them. What made sense? What didn't? What did you have to add or change? Um, I really think that this kind of work, it only gets better when you share and you use it in the real world. Um, I wasn't intentionally gatekeeping this, but what better place to release it than here? So I know that this is not the final answer. Criminally, like AI is not on the model. So, like, I have work to do. I know that. But I would love to hear at different types of organizations. Like, I've never worked at a marketing centric DevRel function, so I know that's fundamentally going to change the model. So, what do you guys think about that I haven't had at previous roles? So please, there's a bunch of contact information on the GitHub. Like, please reach out and share that with me. A couple acknowledgments I want to make. If you know Jonathan LeBlanc, he is really wonderful. He got me into DevRel and gave me some really awesome feedback on this presentation, and of course, kind of gently nudged me to release it and give it to all of you. So shout out to him, and also Chris Chiganos is my next manager, and he also gave some really great feedback as well. Um, I do want to highlight some next steps that I'm thinking as I build this out further. So I do want to do a deep dive into each cluster of those main clusters you saw on the original model. You'll see I only went from the main node down one level, but it could have continued to go deeper and deeper. So I want to give a breakdown on those of like at the 3 companies I worked at, like what have I learned about each of those areas? And I think that could be helpful to share with others. So I want to do deep dives. I also, as I said, like I want to showcase the different flavors of DevRel and have templates for each of those to showcase how that changes things. But yeah, if you are in the early stages of building a program, especially, I would love to chat. If you need the sounding board or have any ideas that you want to run by someone, I would love for you to reach out. Again, my name is Kourtney Meiss, and you can add me on LinkedIn. But thank you so much for your time. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Kourtney. We have a couple of minutes if anyone has any questions for Kourtney.
Can we go back to the slides, the network graph, your network graphs? Yes, that one. So can you speak just a little bit to the different sizes of the bubbles and how you organize that, please?
Yeah, so the large, let's see here. The largest bubbles you'll see are the main areas I broke it down into. So these are all listed right here. Anything that was like slightly bigger was just one level deeper, but had these other nodes. So like, for example, here we have architecture, and we had to talk about authentication and authorization. And then one level deeper was all of our options that we had to say yay or nay to for authentication. So it really outlines kind of the higher level topics that you want to make sure that you might not be owning, but you need to have a conversation about and make sure that you are connected with those people. So again, like the idea here is that when you're starting the program, or somebody is starting a company period, and they want to make sure they're looking forward to set you up for success, you can have these conversations as early on as possible, so you don't have to go back and fix things and waste some time you can just jump right in and get started. But again, I would love to go more than 3 levels deep because all of those, like, I could have dived into. But I was like, wow, like, visually, no one could parse that. And then eventually it would mean nothing. I was, admittedly, I was really hoping to make a model that truly is that visually complex, just for like the shock factor of like, look at the mess that we deal with. Like, now you can see it. And like, clearly, like, we're valuable because we do all this. And if you don't have somebody doing it effectively, like, how is all this working? So
Hi. Sorry. I really love the focus on the internal activities of a DevRel team. It is often overlooked, but sometimes those activities, we're way more an influencer than an owner, to your point that you just mentioned. Like, we clearly own the webinars or the events, but when it comes to those internal activities, we're nudgers often. Or is there any challenge with listing a bubble for something without kind of overclaiming responsibility, and how do you like walk that line?
I think yes, like that's always going to be a challenge. One variation that I haven't created but I have thought about is like doing another color coding for different teams and what they own. So you could like show that to leadership and break it down for them, or even for just stakeholders that, like, again, it's not just leaders. It's like people like have never worked with DevRel and they're like, oh, I thought you just like wrote some documentation and like that's all you owned. But like, no, this is everything that we have to touch. So one idea I had was to do a version that breaks down the color coding. But I think like that does raise an interesting point to make sure that when you are having these conversations, like, we're not trying to necessarily own all of this, but like there were conversations. So at TraceLink specifically, like if you don't know what it is, like it was pharmaceutical supply chain software. And they were an interesting setup because they had this one side of the business that was successful and profitable. And then they launched their platform and they were using that success to like pour money into this like experimental piece. Um, and so, people were like set in their ways and like they already had all these conversations and they didn't even realize when we came on board that like we needed a seat at the table and we were now bringing like a new perspective in. And like, again, we didn't want to own it, but like needed to be able to report that we've made the connection, we are at the table, we're making progress with it so that, you do bubble that up to leadership and say, like, I was in this really important conversation and like you're not going to hear about it really anymore from me, but like I'm there and I'm important. And that's, really what I'm hoping the model does. Because we use this as our North Star. And so every time we met with leadership, we include this in our decks, made this the standard for what they were going to see. And it significantly helped us have conversations. I think we might have time for one more.
Thanks. So just picking up on the theme of ownership and things like that, maybe comment on this version of the slide on timing and, kind of how your team picked what to work on this quarter and why some of the, external nodes got worked first.
Yeah, so one thing I did not touch on is really the fact that you kind of have to work from the outside in. So like your central nodes, like you have to have a lot done before you can mark that central node as like everything has been released and functioning. So it does really work outside and then down to the bigger nodes. This is kind of where those other models come into play and help you decide like, okay, what stage are we at with developers and which things do we need early on. So that's why I said like other models are useful and have their time and their place. And luckily, like Jonathan was my manager and leader at the time, and he has years and years of experience in DevRel. So we we had worked together previously, and we had a good idea of like which touch points were kind of low hanging fruit. Like, what could we move the needle on to show leadership some easy wins that we were, proving our value and that we were going to stick around for a couple years. And I think one thing that really I love about this version is we could have sat down and put 2026 targets, 2027 targets. Like, when we talked behind the scenes, we were like, wow, we have 5 years plus of work that we could outline right now that we know is going to happen. So when we were having those conversations with leadership, it would have been awesome to put in front of them like, hey, I think that you think that we're going to be in a great place in maybe a year. That's definitely not the truth. Things are moving slow because we have to have all those conversations and all those cross-functional collaborators that have to get in line and work on things and release products. So just giving them that high-level overview. But yeah, picking was really relying on other models, and then also just our previous knowledge about what we could move the needle on and what was ready. Mainly at TraceLink, what was ready. A lot of the product was not, so that made it kind of easy.
One last one. Thank you. Have you thought about like how this intersects with like Sean's model or the other ones as well? Because like I feel like this is a lot of the internals. And you've captured a lot of that, but like the external things, like, and I can't quite read all the text, so maybe it's there, but.
Totally. So while this is like, I want to make clear the internal functions, there are external functions on here too. So let me go back two really quick. So for example, like dev tools, okay, maybe not working here. But for example, developer experience over here, we have outreach. So we have blogs, we have our API reference, we have newsletters, all of that. So those pieces are included because, again, you're having internal conversations about them. Like, even if you haven't even released a blog post yet, you're creating strategy, you're having conversations, work is being done. So I think by nature, like, hopefully all of the external is also included in this model. But yeah, really meant to have those internal conversations.
All right. Thank you so much, Kourtney. Let's give it up for Kourtney.